One of the things you're supposed to read today, in addition to that overview of the civilization in the Berger textbook, is an introduction to the Epic of Gilgamesh, which is one of the first and most ancient epics in the world. And what an epic is, it's a big story with a main character who faces some problems, and you can learn lessons from it. And we know there are epics in all sorts of different civilizations. We're going to look at a lot of them. We're going to look at the Mahabharata and the Rig Veda in India. We're going to look at epics in China. We're going to look at epics in ancient Greece, like the Iliad and the Odyssey. These things, they're stories, so they aren't the past necessarily. A lot of times they incorporate gods and things that certainly couldn't have happened. But they do teach us lessons that these people thought were important to remember. I think a good parallel of this is to think about the story of George Washington and the apple tree. And if you don't know anything about George Washington and the apple tree, it's apparently when he was a little boy, George Washington was out messing around, took an axe, and he cut down a tree because he wanted to. And his dad showed up and said, "Boy, did you cut down that tree?" And little George Washington looked up to him and said, "Father, I cannot tell a lie. I cut down that apple tree. I'm sorry." And his dad basically said, "Well, thanks for telling the truth, son." That probably didn't happen. But what that story does is it uses an individual that's important to our civilization, George Washington, and teaches us a lesson that even good people can do bad things. That if you tell the truth, everything will work out fine in the end. So what we have in the Epic of Gilgamesh is the story about a king of ancient Uruk. A king who is rough and rugged and in some ways great as a leader, in some ways really bad as a leader. He faces some fun obstacles, like a fight with this dude Enkidu. And then later he and Enkidu become friends, and they fight this horrible big creature that lives in the forest called Humbaba. And later on he goes and he meets somebody who tells him a story of a flood that covered the entire world. And it's very similar to the biblical story of the flood, but way older as well. So take a look at that overview. Get a general idea of what Gilgamesh is about. But then when you read those two assigned excerpts, one's really short, it's about Enkidu's dream. Think about what they see the afterlife as like and why they would think it's that way. Excuse me for 1 second. Wallace, stop that. And then when you get into the story about the flood, think about, okay, this guy who Gilgamesh is talking about in here, he's got a really weird name. I normally call him Tim because his name is like Uptimasham. How do we know what his civilization was like? Does it have the characteristics of a civilization? See if you can't dig in there, and see if you can't gain some other information from these folks. What were they afraid of? The forest. Why? What did they value? What made Gilgamesh a good king? And as you do that, you can learn a little bit about these folks. So that's kind of foreshadowing for what you're doing on Friday. We've got another source on Friday, so we'll take a look at that in the next couple of slides.